There's been good and bad things that we've seen from the Steelers offense in training camp. I'll go over them right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is sponsored by eBay Motors. eBay Motors, a championship team, and what championship teams are usually about are about each player being perfect fits on the team. That goes the same with your vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors right now, and you can look for the green check on eBay Motors. You can stay in the game with eBay's guaranteed fit. ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. So, as I said before, I wanted to talk about one positive and one negative thing, the big elements that I think that are coming out of the Steelers offense right now that we've seen in training camp, because we've talked about Kenny Pickett. I talked about how I like his back shoulder throw that he's been using in training camp. I've talked about different things that I've liked, but I've also seen some things that I don't like. And it's not necessarily just Kenny Pickett, but this is about the offense in general. The biggest thing that I think is positive for this offense right now is how the run game, when the pads went on, definitely became a factor in the offense. When I went back and I looked at how the Steelers performed when they put on the pads, especially in the run game, there was a really strong sign that that balance that we've been talking about could play a factor in how this offense played. For one, in 7 shots when the first team offense was on the field, they've only run the ball 3 times because they've only been in pads for 2 practice, but in those 3 times, the 2 times they ran with Najee Harris, they were both touchdowns on 7 shots. Now, remember, 7 shots is the play are 7 chances at the 2-yard line where the offense is trying to get into the end zone, sort of a red zone / 2-point conversion practice drill to kind of help the offense and the defense get used to working in tight spaces, which is important because the Steelers' red zone offense was one of the worst in the NFL last year, and we've talked about how that needs to be a part of how this offense steps up, and we'll talk about that more about that in a bit. But the running part of it has been successful. And the running part of the offense, I think in general, was successful. You saw when Isaac Seumalo was out there with Mason Cole, James Daniels, Dan Moore Jr., and Chuks Okorafor. Even when Broderick Jones was in, the offensive line was getting movement and they were creating space. And then based off of that, and we talked about this with Alan Saunders on the show, it allowed for more play action use in training camp. Now, we do not know if any of this translates to real games. That's part of what happens with football. This kind of stuff happens where you get excited about one thing, and then things look different once they start playing other teams. But to me, what I'm seeing right now, one thing that I think that Steelers fans should be excited about is that the offensive line, when Isaac Seumalo is out there, seems like he's kind of an anchor that's helping everyone else play a bit better. And Broderick Jones, like I said on the Thursday episode, I think he's been making some headway as well as far as progress. Now, he's a rookie. He's going to have some rough moments as well. But as far as where he is compared to like where Dan Moore Jr. was when he was a rookie, he is ahead of the game, I think, by a lot in that department. And I think that he's going to continue to grow at a really great pace. And again, what's happening with the run game, when they're succeeding there, it's forcing defenders to come up a little bit, and it's opening up space for guys to get open behind them, which will open up the middle part of the field and more passing options that are easier to target for Kenny Pickett and whoever's quarterbacking at the time for the Steelers, because sometimes at training camp it's Mitch Trubisky or Mason Rudolph, but we're seeing guys like Cody White, Gunnar Olszewski, Miles Boykin breaking open in the middle part of the field when they're calling play action. Why? Because the defense is starting to respect the offensive line, and that natural tendency just think of, oh man, when they run the ball, they're getting to us. We have to be quicker to stop them. We're going to take a few steps up to try to play the run. Oh wait, it's a fake. Crap. I've now left the space behind me a little bit open, and that's allowed for guys to find more soft spots in the defense. And that's a very real way to create opportunities in the NFL. I think we saw a bit of that with the Eagles last year, the Niners. They're two teams that use that quite a bit and found a way to succeed. And that's got to be a way for the Steelers to find easier success for Kenny Pickett, because you want to get Kenny Pickett more open looks, more easier reads, and that's one way to do it. But when teams aren't afraid of your run game because your offensive line isn't doing enough and your running back isn't getting the yards that's there, and they're not afraid of your deep passing game, they can kind of stay home and you don't ever get the chance to really pick them apart. But when you start forcing them to commit to one thing or the other, that's when you can get them on their toes, and that's when you can kind of catch them off guard as they gamble a little bit more to stop things that you're getting really good at. So that's one good thing. The bad thing is the thing I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier in this segment, and that's the Steelers' red zone offense, I think, is still in struggles. Now, as I said, the running part of it seemed really good, at least when they tried to run with Najee Harris the couple times they did. They scored every time, and they looked pretty confident in doing so. But passing-wise, it's looking pretty rough. There have been Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. No. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So there have been 5. And Thursday. So ever since the Steelers have started doing 7 shots in practice, which started, I believe, last Friday, which was the first 7 shots, because they didn't do it during the first practice. They kind of used that as a warm-up. The Steelers' first team has passed the ball 21 times. Of those 21 times, they've converted 6 of those attempts to be scores on 7 shots. That's less than 1/3, which is not what you want in those situations. Now, again, it's training camp. I'm not reading too much into that. That's why I don't bring up training camp stats like they're a real thing. But I wanted to go back and tally up the results that I've seen when Kenny Pickett's on the field, as well as when the first team offensive line, Najee Harris, and those guys are on the field, because this has been something we've been harping on in the offseason. The Steelers have to get better in the red zone. And part of that might be just running the football. And if that can be great, awesome. But they're going to need a balance in the red zone as well. As much as it'll be great to see them be able to run the ball in the red zone, there's going to be times where teams can overcommit to the run, and the Steelers have to be able to take advantage of that and throw the ball in tight spaces and convert in the red zone that way. And we haven't seen that yet from Kenny Pickett. Now, I'll say this. It's all on Kenny Pickett. Some of those plays are drops. Some of those plays are the offensive line kind of getting bullied a little bit at different times, because the Steelers' first-team defensive line is really good. But Kenny Pickett shares his blame in some of that. Some of that he's holding on to the ball a little bit longer. Some of that he's missing his target by a little bit, and it's causing some problems. But it's kind of an everyone is to blame situation. And I think that's still kind of what we're seeing right now, is this offense figuring out its rhythm and how they're going to play. And again, my point that I've been making all through training camp, they are miles ahead of where they were this time last year. They are moving the ball. They're able to communicate. They're able to make plays. There's easier connections with receivers, but this is part of the progress of a growing offense. They get sharper, but then they have to grow. They still make mistakes, then they have to grow there. It is a long climb for this offense to get up to being a very good offense. Right now, they're trying to get to a solidly balanced offense that's in the middle pack of the league. Again, if they do that and the defense is elite, this team is making the playoffs and probably making some noise in the playoffs. But this is why I try to say everything with temperament. As much as I think that Kenny Pickett can turn into someday a very good quarterback and maybe even a great quarterback, right now, these are the things he has to work on. Some of it's timing, some of it's trusting his guys in tight spaces, and some of it's knowing how to respond in different situations when you get into tighter spaces in the red zone, and in moments like 7 shots when you're trying to finish strong and get it to your guys. So there's still a lot of room to grow there, but I think that we'll start to see Friday Night Lights practices coming up today, later tonight. In Latrobe. It's at the high school stadium in the city. So that'll be fun to watch. It's always fun to watch. I was talking to this Brian Batko on the North Shore Drive podcast. There hasn't been a Friday Night Lights practice for the Steelers since 2019. Like, Minkah Fitzpatrick hasn't experienced that yet. Neither has Najee Harris, Kenny Pickett, or a lot of the players on the team. I think Alex Highsmith hasn't yet. So that'll be kind of cool to see, because it is cool to see the lights go on, the pads go back on, so you get to see some more backs on backers, linemen on linemen. lot of fun and stuff there. I'll be on hand and I'll get you guys some reactions. I'll try to get you guys some bonus content this weekend as well, recapping what I see or any notes that I take from those practices there. But still, it's going to be a lot of fun to see, and we'll get to see how this offense continues to progress and maybe more positive negatives we pull out of some of these practices. But we'll also want to talk about some things that Mike Tomlin's been doing and how he continues to build connections with his players, old and young, and things that I think are really working for the Steelers in training camp right now. We'll talk about that in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We got a lot more to discuss. But first, I want to talk to you guys because this episode is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. Now, if you don't know about Underdog Fantasy, it's the ultimate place that you need to go to get ready for fantasy football season and fantasy sports season. August is here, which means you know what that means. It's the official start of fantasy football drafting month. You get championship ready for your home league by trying out their best ball on Underdog Fantasy. All you do is one live snake draft with no waivers, no trades. Underdog sets your best lineup every week. Try it out with Underdog's Best Ball Mania tournament. The largest fantasy football contest of all time is back, and even bigger with $15 million of total prizes up for grabs, including an absurd $3 million going to the winner. Last year, the winner drafted their team in July, so don't wait around. Get on it now in August by visiting UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with promo code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON, Locked On, and you'll get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy promo code Locked On. Underdog Fantasy promo code Locked On. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our episode here talking about Mike Tomlin, and we're not going to talk about all the different things about Mike Tomlin, but I think we're going to talk about something that I've been noticing more in this training camp as he continues to build his connections with his players, and something that I think really works for the Steelers' favor and probably one of Mike Tomlin's biggest strengths. Now some people out there that don't like Mike Tomlin, they'll call him a cheerleader. They'll bring up this, anything that they don't like about him. But I don't think that the one thing I think that nobody can deny is that Mike Tomlin builds connections with players. He builds real relationships, and that's something that helps players develop in their careers. A lot of players, even ones who leave the Steelers, talk about that and how they love to play for Mike Tomlin. Players who don't play for the Steelers talk about how they wish they could play for Mike Tomlin. And some people don't, I think, understand what plays into that sometimes. And I think it's important to note the different dynamics that this guy lives, breathes, and dies football. And this is just what he's about all the time. And that allows him to connect with more football players and build those relationships with, like he did with Minka Fitzpatrick before he was even a Steeler, so that when they wanted to trade for him, Minka Fitzpatrick knew, I like Mike Tomlin. I have a good relationship with him. That's a guy I could see myself playing for. And we've seen some moments where it's kind of played out where he's kind of, we're seeing players show their respect and their appreciation for Mike Tomlin. There was another cool moment that happened, in fact, on Thursday's practice, where at the end of the practice, when the Steelers were doing their 2-minute drills, Kenny Pickett threw an interception that was picked off by Joey Porter Jr. And it was a really impressive interception, I have to say, too, because it was a comeback route by Cody White, and Joey Porter Jr. was in his drop back, read the play, jumped the ball, intercepted the pass, and it was a really solid play by him. And Mike Tomlin afterwards, he's kind of been playing these games with Joey Porter Jr. and George Pickens. He's picked on Joey Porter when George Pickens gotten him. He's picked on George Pickens when Joey's gotten him. And it's been kind of interesting to see. But in that moment, even though George Pickens wasn't even on the field for that play, Mike Tomlin is right there for it. And he looks at George Pickens. He's like, hey, GP, I think Joey won today. And George Pickens is like, man, I wasn't out there. So that wasn't on me. I don't care what anybody says. And he's like, yeah, but it was still pretty significant. He was pretty smooth out there with it. And George Pickens kind of just like laughs about it and realizes what Tomlin's saying is that, like, hey, give your guy some props. Even though it wasn't against you, he's still making plays out there. And that's the guy that you're a rival with in camp. And George Pickens kind of laughs about it. He says, yeah, it was a good pick. And and then they dap each other up. And that's kind of that moment. But it's moments like that I think that Mike Tomlin is really good at cultivating positive environmental situations with some of his players. And he's trying to make sure that happens with this younger player, because it doesn't always work out with everybody. Look at Antonio Brown. But again, he kept Antonio Brown for 9 seasons. No one else kept him for more than a year and a half. But still, I think that's a really good point that Mike Tomlin brings on his side, and he challenges everyone differently. There's different ways he pushes people. He pushes Broderick Jones differently. I told you about how he was pushing Darnell Washington the other day, putting him up against TJ Watt and challenging him even when he won against TJ Watt to do better here and do better there. And that's part of where I think that Mike Tomlin's strengths are. And there's been other moments as well. There's a really good article on SteelersNow.com from our friends there with Alan Saunders and Nick Farabaugh, where Rondé Barber, who's going to the Hall of Fame, credits Mike Tomlin and his relationship for helping him grow, and saying that Mike Tomlin helped propel him to a Hall of Fame career. That was when Mike Tomlin was working with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers way back in the day. So that's another point of it. But there was another moment that I got to catch up with one of the Steelers about, and that was Trey Norwood. There was a play in the 2-minute drill where Trey Norwood, who I think is actually having a really solid camp. The Steelers safeties have been kind of banged up. Minkah Fitzpatrick has had an excused absence. We don't know what the exact reason is for that, but we understand that it's not injury related. It's just he's dealing with something away from football. Mike Tomlin says he has his support. We'll see what happens when Minkah Fitzpatrick comes back. I'm confident that he will. But DeMonte KZ has been hurt and Keanu Neal's been hurt. So that's forced Trey Norwood and Kenny Robinson to kind of take over the roles at the safety spots. But both have kind of looked good. Kenny Robinson's made some interceptions. Trey Norwood's made some breakups. They've both looked pretty confident as the Steelers' backup safeties. And Trey Norwood, on a 2-minute drill series, he had one play where he was diving to get the football and he just missed it, but it still ended up being incomplete. So he was kind of happy about it. And then as soon as he's getting up, Mike Tomlin is like right there. And he's like, Trey, you got to be a little bit faster than that, Trey, if you want to break it up. And so Trey Norwood kind of looks at him and he says, all you've been doing is this. And he's like, making like the mouth moving sound, or the mouth moving like with his hand. He's like, all you've been doing is yapping all day. All day you've been yapping to me. Is that all you going to do today? And Mike Tomlin looks right back at him and says, yup. And it was just like this moment, like, yeah, I'm going to chirp at you because I want you to do better. And it was kind of a reminiscent of a moment that Jim Wexell actually brought up, and Jim, who we had on the show, he brought up when talking to Trey Norwood, saying like, that reminded me of a moment where he used to do that with Mike Hilton, and he's absolutely right to call that out. So shout out to Jim Wexell for being another great reporter who knows what he's talking about and a historian when it comes to the Steelers. But back when Mike Hilton was proving himself for the Steelers in 2017, that was actually my first training camp. I remember Mike Hilton would kind of get poked at by Mike Tomlin at the beginning of camp, where he'd be like, "You're too small, Mike. You're too small to make plays out there." And Mike Hilton took that to heart, and then throughout training camp, it was like the last week, he was making plays everywhere. He was breaking up this pass, breaking up that pass, and every time he would break up a pass, he'd look at Mike Tomlin, he'd say, "Am I too small? Am I too small?" And Mike was like, all right, you earned your respect. But that's kind of the way that he pushed him. And it was a similar situation with Trey Norwood. We caught up with Trey Norwood a little bit. I asked him about that moment and also how Trey Norwood sees himself as a better player this year. Here was Trey Norwood after Thursday's practice with the Steelers training camp.
Trey, I saw an exchange where you made a play and Mike Tomlin was kind of barking at you, and you said, "You've been talking all day." What was that about?
Man, you got just friendly competition. Being able to play for a head coach that like that, man. He gets into it, gets us going, man. It's something that the atmosphere that we love to have. Being able to come out here and have fun, and have a head coach that allows you to have fun. Something that I love. We go at it all the time, man. Something I just love enjoying to be able to come out here and do.
I've seen you get your hands on a bunch of footballs out here the past 2 weeks here. What's different about your game? Do you feel like the game's slower, or how much progress have you made?
Honestly, kind of how you said, is the game slower? I kind of think it has slowed down for me a little bit, just going into year 3. Then being able to be in the same system, so knowing the calls, knowing where my spots are within each call, knowing my assignment. I think it slows my mind down, slows me down. Just knowing where my spots are, knowing where my landmarks are, being able to trust my technique, and then just be the football player that God blessed me to be, with the abilities to let my abilities to take over and go make plays.
Now, that was Trey Norwood again. And one thing that we've talked about, Trey Norwood was a guy who, if you remember, was a 7th round pick by the Steelers a few years ago. This is his 3rd season in the league. When he came in with the Steelers, I believe it was the 2021 NFL draft that he got picked. He came in with 5 interceptions in his last year. He was a big player on the football, and that was kind of a spark in his last year at Oklahoma when he had that big run as a junior. that year where he kind of blew up. He only had 1 interception before that, and then his last year he had 5 interceptions. And I think that's indicative of Trey Norwood's skill set in that he's not the fastest, he's not the strongest, he's not the quickest, but he's a smart, heady player, and that's how he kind of kept his way on the team. He's been good at special teams. He's been a guy that can learn things fast. He can contribute. But I think now what you're seeing is, like you're saying, like he's talking about there, he's getting to his spots quicker. He knows where, knows how to quickly think through different situations a lot faster than he did recently. And I think that's where you see Trey Norwood starting to get better there. So kudos to him for his progress. We'll continue to see him and Kenny Robinson make plays throughout training camp. But back to the Mike Tomlin part there. You heard how Mike Tomlin's kind of challenging him. He's poking at him. He's like, it's fun, but it's also like he's pushing me to be better. Those are the things that Mike Tomlin does to get more out of his guys. And I think that's part of why he's never had a losing season. And yes, he has his faults. He has the in-game decisions I disagree with. He has things where I think that he could do certain things a little bit better here and there. But by and large, that he pulls the most out of his team. I mean, you look back at last year, the 2022 Steelers should not have been 9-8 if that was a roster with most other coaches in the NFL. They should have fallen apart when TJ Watt went down, and they did for a time, but they shouldn't have been able to bounce back with a rookie quarterback and an offense that didn't score a whole lot of points. But somehow they still found a way to get back there, and that's part of what Mike Tomlin does. He finds a way to bounce back in seasons. He gets the most out of his players, and his players respond to him. And I think that's, again, a positive sign for the Steelers and something cool that we're seeing in training camp. Another factor that we're seeing in training camp that I think is really good is some of the mentorship situations that are going on. We got a unique mentorship situation where it was like 2 different mentors on both sides of the ball for one of the Steelers rookies. I'll explain what happened there in a minute on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stick with us. We'll get to that clip with a Steelers rookie who brought that up with us after Thursday's practice right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here on the Friday edition. Also, for those who are probably wondering where the heck is Jenna Hunter, Jenna's busy. Like, training camp is tough for me to record after. That's why sometimes these episodes go up super late at night because I'm tired and I'm trying to get other stuff done. I'm trying to also get adequate sleep so I'm not just a zombie on all of these shows. Sometimes I feel like a zombie on some of these shows, but it is what it is. So Jenna Hunter couldn't make it. She'll be back next week. But let's get into the point I was talking about mentors. And we've talked about some of the mentors on the Steelers roster right now. We've talked about Patrick Peterson and Joey Porter Jr. Now, Patrick Peterson is coaching Joey Porter Jr. In fact, I think it was Thursday's show, where we had a clip of Joey Porter Jr. It was Wednesday's show that we had a clip of Joey Porter Jr. He talked about how Patrick Peterson's been mentoring him before and after practice, gives him his space during practice, but he checks on him and he's pushing him, he's challenging him, he's saying, hey, you got to do it this way, try this that way, and that's been cool. We talked about how TJ Watt has been teaching Nick Herbig pass rush moves, and Nick Herbig's been checking with him and say, hey, did I do it this way? Can I do it that way? And things they're learning that way. And there's I think more than a few situations like that on the Steelers roster right now, where you have veterans who are teaching to the younger guys. And there was another cool situation with Keanu Benton, who we caught up with after Thursday's practice. Now, Thursday was not a padded practice, but we got to talk to Keanu Benton and asked him kind of how he felt. He said he's felt good about training camp so far. But listen to Keanu Benton talk about when I asked him about mentoring and who he's kind of been talking to the most. And he brings up 2 players, both on opposite sides of the ball. I'll let him explain it better. Here's Keanu Benton.
Who's pushed you the most so far, as like a teammate that's kind of challenged you a little bit more, either on the defensive side or the offensive side of the ball?
I would say Nate Herbig and Larry O on the defensive side. Larry O on the defensive side just teaching me how to refine my things and kind of seeing stuff that I don't see and how to get better at it. And then Nate also being an opposing person, kind of seeing where I can get them better and basically telling me this move was working, you shouldn't have stopped it, or like you should have went here instead of there, how to freeze my feet and stuff like that. So he kind of gives me tips and tricks on how to beat linemen.
Have you seen Nate kind of be that guy that steps up and kind of helps the younger defensive linemen from the other side, get a view from the other side?
I mean, probably not all of us, but that's like a brother to me. Me, him, and Nick used to train all the time, and then he also used to give me feedback on my play in college.
So that's another factor to bring up here when people always joke about how the Steelers keep brothers. This is another way that positive relationships foster here because you look at how Keanu Benton went to Wisconsin with Nick Herbig. Both played on the same defense. Both came out the same draft class. Well, Nick Herbig, of course, brothers to Nate Herbig, and even though Nate Herbig was a Stanford guy, he worked out with Keanu Benton and those guys. And not that this was exactly planned in that way, but Nate Herbig and Nick Herbig and Isaac Seumalo and Keanu Benton and Broderick Jones, all of those guys have been around each other a lot. And Nate Herbig has helped, as you just heard, Keanu Benton learn things. And it's funny because when I was looking at the Tuesday padded practice, and there were a couple plays where I thought Nate Herbig got the best of Keanu Benton. And I was talking about with Mark Caboli of The Athletic, and we were kind of like, that's interesting. The backup guy, Herbig, kind of getting in the rookie's grill a little bit. Wonder how he's responding to that. But it's interesting that he wasn't necessarily getting frustrated about it, because that's his guy, though. That's a guy that's helping mentor him, and that Nate Herbig, after beating Keanu Benton, is helping him learn things. And that's something that doesn't happen that often. When offensive guys beat defensive guys and vice versa, they often just kind of look at each other and be like, "Yeah, that's right," and they go back to their respective sides, and it's kind of like a rivalry thing. We've talked about that with Pickens and Porter. Golden and Gentry it happens every year with a bunch of different players. But for Nate Herbig, the offensive line brother of Nick Herbig, who's the edge rusher for the Steelers, they drafted out of Wisconsin in the 4th round. But Nate Herbig helping out Keanu Benton, I think, is a really cool thing. And so he has Herbig on the offensive side helping him, and he has Larry Ogunjobi on the defensive side helping him. And that's a really good sign, in my opinion, that the Steelers have multiple layers of mentoring and leadership available to their younger guys. Because again, this team is getting younger. They're drafting a lot of different guys. They're keeping younger guys, and they want to keep the older guys with them. We've talked about guys like T.J. Watt, Minka Fitzpatrick, Cam Hayward, now Alex Highsmith, who just signed a longer deal. There's guys like that set the tone, but they need these young guys to kind of pick up the positive traits and the positive characteristics that you want to keep in the locker room and also add to the locker room. And the only way that's going to happen is if some of these older guys get to them and help them understand where they can be at their best. And to me, that is just as important as what's going on the field in training camp, because they need positive environments, they need positive reinforcement, and they need a great organization and a great locker room. If they have those things, it does end up helping you on the field. Heck, look at it right now. It's helping Keanu Benton learn a little bit faster in training camp. These are some of the positive things that I think that are happening. You don't get to necessarily see them on the front lines of obvious things that you see in practice, but when we get to kind of listen to how things interact, like I brought up the Pickens and Tomlin thing, how they kind of had a little funny back and forth, little stuff like that helps build a successful organization. One thing that Ike Taylor has talked about on this show years ago when we had him on here, and one thing that the Steelers of the late 2000s were more than happy to talk about, was their relationships were what built that great defense. James Ferrier was kind of the leader of it. They'd watch Monday Night Football together, even if they were, even if it wasn't like a rival that was on, but they had this connection that allowed each other to challenge each other and challenge the young guys that were coming onto the team. And that's something that the Steelers need across the board to build themselves back to being a contender. On top of the talent that they need chemistry, they need trust, and they need a group of people who can lead and also follow. So I think it's another positive sign for what the Steelers are doing right now. We'll see how that continues to grow throughout training camp. We're finishing up the second week of training camp this weekend. Friday's Friday Night Lights, and they got Saturday and Sunday practices. I'll be at all three, so stay tuned here on the Locked On Steelers podcast up from that. You can also check out the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette for myself and my colleagues, Brian Batko, Jerry Dulac, Ray Fittipaldo, who will all be on hand for that there if you want daily updates on Steelers training camp here. Thanks again for tuning in to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Check me out on the daily Monday through Friday episodes from the Locked On Steelers podcast on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content like we hope to have out this weekend if technology works for us this weekend, as we'll be out there late night in Latrobe. But thanks again, everybody. Hope that you enjoyed this week of training camp coverage. I'll be back this weekend and next week covering more Steelers training camp right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.